Hey friends, and welcome back to a new video. Today I'll be going over the books I read in the month of August. Before I go over my August reads, I just want to mention that in my mind it is autumn. As soon as September rolls around, it is fall for me. So even though it is almost 40 degrees outside with the Humidex, to me it's fall. So I ended up decorating my shelves, as you can see behind me, and I am just embodying the fall spirit because I am so sick and tired of this heat. Let me know what the weather's been like wherever you are, because I hate it so much where I am. Decorating early just helps me bear the heat. But anyways, on to what you're all here for, and that is my August wrap up. I ended up reading 20 books, but 9 of them were picture books, so I have 11 that are full-length novels. And I also have 3 DNFs, 2 of which are temporary, and the third I'm still kind of trying to decide if I want to finish it or not, just because it's been dragging on. So I'll start with the 3 DNFs, then I'll quickly go over the picture books, and then we'll go over the novels. So the first book here is Landscape and Sunlight by Elizabeth Fair, and this is the book that I'm kind of having a hard time with trying to decide whether or not I want to DNF it or push through, just because I haven't really been invested in it and I haven't felt the desire to pick it back up when I do put it down. It's one of those books where nothing really happens besides English village happenings and different characters interacting, meeting up, and discussing village gossip, and just the typical small English village vibes, which I normally really enjoy, but for some reason there's just something missing from this book. So I'm just not sure if maybe it's a case of the story itself or her writing, or I don't know. I really don't know what it is, but this is typically something that would work for me, so not quite sure why I'm not really enjoying it so much. I also DNF'd Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. It's just a temporary DNF. I wasn't in the mood for a high fantasy when I started it, and then also Les Mis, which I started back in the winter, and I need to restart it with a fresh palette, and just not have other classics going while I'm reading this book. And Victober's coming up, so fresh start with this book, hopefully this upcoming winter. And moving on to the picture books that I read, like I said, there are 9 of them, and I had to return them all to the library, but before I did take a video of them just to have, and I will quickly go through each of them and just quickly share my thoughts and my rating. First up is Woodland Dreams, and this one I gave 4 out of 5 stars. I love the illustration style, as you saw in the end papers, and just the illustration style in general. I love all things woodland, and the illustrations were lovely. Perfect picture book for woodland and forest lovers like myself. Then we have Merry Christmas Anne, which was a big 5 stars. I adored this. Of course, it's Anne of Green Gables, so I had to adore it, but truly this was absolutely beautiful and whimsical, and the illustrations were perfect, the story was perfect, and just everything about it made my heart just sing, and it was so beautiful, and I can totally see myself reading this to my kids in the future. Then we have Love in the Library, and this one I gave 4 stars. It's a beautiful story about finding love in wartime. It also features what life was like for Japanese Americans incarcerated in internment camps during World War II, which is something I actually knew next to nothing about, so I'm very glad I read it. And next up is The Fantastic Flying Books of Mr. Morris Lesmore, and this one was very fun. I gave this one 4 stars as well, and it's a very simple story, but a powerful one at the same time, and it's a beautiful story about the power of the story. That's basically what this book is about. And then we have Over and Under the Canyon, and I really loved this one. I've read a few of the other ones in this series, and this one and the next are both about a childlike wonder of nature, basically, and the next one was Over and Under the Pond, and I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. Same thoughts as above. It's just about a childlike wonder of nature, and beautiful illustrations, beautiful story. Fletcher and the Falling Leaves, I gave 5 stars. This is one of my favorites, and of course loving fall as much as I do. I adored this book. We have a fox named Fletcher. He notices his favorite tree is starting to lose its leaves, and he's very worried. This was such a cute one, and I loved the illustrations. And then we have Bear Says Thanks. This one I gave 4 stars. It's a cute story about a bear wanting to host a big feast for his friends, but he has no food in his cupboards. So what is he to do? This one was so cute. And again, beautiful illustrations, just very sweet. And finally, Sleep Tight Farm. This one I gave 5 stars. It's one of my favorites. And this one is about a farming family preparing for the coming winter. And I absolutely adored this one. So, so beautiful. Y'all, I am so tired and my feet kill from being out and about. I don't know why I decided to film this standing up, but we're gonna sit down. So just give me a second to rearrange the filming setup. All right, hopefully this is okay. Just sat on my bench because my feet are killing me. But for the rest of the books, I am just gonna go in order of least favorite to favorite so I can end on a high note, because my favorite book of the month is the one that I feel like I might take longer talking about just because of how much I loved it. So we'll save that one for last, and we'll start off with my least favorite. All right, so this first book here, I gave 2 stars. I really did not like it, and I'm so sad because I really liked the first book in this duology. And this book is Heart of the Sun Warrior by Sue Lin Tan. It's the second book in the Celestial Kingdom duology. And the first book is, what's it called? Daughter of the Moon Goddess, my brain. But Daughter of the Moon Goddess, I believe I gave 4 stars. I really enjoyed it when I read it, and that one definitely felt like a more mature, whimsical, almost sort of Disney movie, but more mature. It's heavily inspired by Chinese mythology, and we have this girl named Xingyan, and her mother is the moon goddess, and she had stolen this elixir of immortality from an emperor and was subsequently exiled to the moon. And her daughter Xingyin, who is our main character, her existence is being hidden from the celestial emperor, but then she's discovered and she flees the moon and ends up in the celestial kingdom and trains to be this warrior, and the story kind of goes from there, and she encounters some amazing characters. A love triangle kind of develops in the first book, but it wasn't done in a way that it drove me nuts. In this book, things went in a direction that I really did not like regarding the love triangle. In the first book, I felt like Xingyin was really rooted in her identity and in her desire to save those that she loves, and in the different tasks that she's given within the military. And along the way, she develops feelings, and she may be confused about some of the feelings that she's feeling. I can't really say what happens in this book or what it's about, but her journey kind of continues. The first book ended in a way where you don't need to read this book. I would just say, if you're interested, read the first book. Don't bother with this one. This one deals with a new issue and a new threat to the kingdom, and yeah, you don't need to read this book. It just felt like a very unnecessary sequel, and I really hated the ending and some choices that Xingyin makes. So I'm going to keep this because it's gorgeous, and I really liked the first book, and I can't bear to separate the 2 books from each other because they look beautiful together. So I'm going to keep this edition, but you don't need to read it. Just read the first book. This next book, I'm honestly scared to even talk about it because I don't know what to say. I don't know how to describe the story or the plot. It was such an interesting mixed bag type of book. And that is Camilla by Frances Burney. I have read one other book by her, which is Evelina, and that one I enjoyed a lot more. It is epistolary, which I really love, and this one is a lot longer than Evelina. The font is puny. I'm just going to read a tiny little blurb from the back because it truly does encompass the entirety of the book without spoiling anything. So it says, this book deals with the matrimonial concerns of a group of young people, Camilla Tyrold and her sisters, the daughters of a country parson and their cousin, Indiana Lynmere. The path of true love, however, is strewn with intrigue and misunderstanding, and that is what drove me nuts. The misunderstanding. It's not just miscommunication, the whole romance, the whole main romance between the 2 main characters. Just everything that goes wrong is because of misunderstanding and lack of communication and immaturity, all of the above. Anyways, and the plot thickened by a marvelous assortment of characters, among them Sir Hugh Tyrold, Camilla's good-natured but unpractical uncle, the grotesque tutor Dr. Orkborn, and the fop Sir Sedley Clarendel. So a lot of the side characters, as they're introduced, they're very entertaining, and there were a lot of entertaining scenes, especially in the first third of this book. I found it to be very interesting and just enjoyed watching the characters go to different balls and different events and meet different characters. And then the rest of the book just became the sameness and tedious and annoying, and nothing interesting was happening. The only character that really had a good grasp on reality in my opinion, was Eugenia, who is a sister of Camilla, and she's barely even there. Like, there is a side plot, I guess, with her, a subplot, but she's definitely not at the heart of the book, and I wish that she was rather than Camilla. I think the book would have been much better if Eugenia's story was at the heart of the book. But it just bothered me how Camilla was told how to perceive her potential romances with a couple different men in certain ways, and there were just so many people telling her what to think and how to speak and what to say, and she just went along with everything. And this whole book is basically people telling you what to do and telling you how to live, and it just got really annoying. And then her main love interest, who I initially started off liking, he got very annoying because he couldn't communicate properly and just figure things out for himself and, you know, take advice when it's given. But he took advice from the worst people to take advice from, the absolute worst people. There were parts of the book I liked, but overall it was a huge drag, and there were so many pointless scenes. It's not like one of those books where you have so much happening, but it all kind of comes together like a Charles Dickens book. Anyways, I really blabbered about that, but that is Camilla. 2 stars. This next book, I wasn't quite sure where to rank it just because I didn't actually give it a rating, and I still don't really know what I would rate it. And that is Midnight on the River Grey by Abigail Wilson. And this one, I didn't necessarily DNF it, but I did skim the second half or so, and then I read the ending because I couldn't anymore. The issue with this book is the fact that it's in first person, which for some reason I don't like first person all that much, especially in historical fiction. And I think the writing style just didn't quite work for me either. The author's writing style, there was nothing bad about it at all, but it just didn't quite work for me. So in this book, we have Rebecca, who is orphaned. Both of her parents are no longer alive, but she has this guardian, and she is supposed to move in with him and her aunt into this grand house in the English countryside, and it's very gothic. And she has these suspicions that he was involved in her brother's mysterious death, and she's trying to figure out what happened to her brother. And she's very unsettled by her guardian, but also kind of attracted to him. So it was a very interesting setup, interesting premise, very atmospheric book, a lot of gothic elements and some spooky scenes, and I really enjoyed that, and it felt perfect for like the fall time. It just felt gloomy and kind of spooky, and I did enjoy that, but overall the writing just wasn't really for me. I am willing to give Abigail Wilson another try. I do believe all her books are in first person, so I'm not quite sure if she is the author for me, but I am willing to try another book by her. Just don't know which one yet, but that was Midnight on the River Grey. I guess it was kind of middle of the road for me. Maybe a 2.5 to 3 star, not quite sure. The rest of the books were either 4, 4.25, 4.5, or 5 stars. So overall, great reading month. I had some really great reads. And this next one, it was a really interesting book, and I've never quite read anything like it. And that is The Feast by Margaret Kennedy. And this one is a modern classic. I'm not quite sure when it was written. So this is copyright 1950. And this book starts off with these 2 spiritual leaders, these 2 reverends, and they are discussing a tragedy that happened. One of them actually has to give a funeral sermon. So they're discussing the tragedy that happened. And basically a cliff collapsed in Cornwall, and this hotel, the Pendesac Hotel that was sitting on the cliff, was buried in the rubble, and 7 of the guests at this hotel died. And then we go back in time by 1 week at the beginning of this holiday where these different guests are coming, and we get to learn about the different guests that are coming to this hotel. So the entirety of the book is basically set over the course of 1 week in post-World War II 1940s Cornwall. And at the very beginning of the book, we know this disaster is going to happen because of these 2 men discussing it, and then we go back in time and learn about the characters, and the book progresses over the week until the tragedy happens. None of that is a spoiler. It's exactly what this book is, what it says on the inside flap as well. This book also uses the 7 deadly sins to characterize 7 of the characters in the book, and it is very interesting how that's done. If I had read it at another time, I would probably say it was boring. It's by no means this edge of your seat epic thriller or anything like that, but there's just something about it that I couldn't put it down while I was reading it. And I think it's because of the way the author did her character study, because it's truly a character study. The different characters live a variety of lifestyles, have a variety of problems in their lives. I don't know what it is about this book, but it does something. And whatever it's doing, it does it effectively, because I liked it a lot. And there is, I guess, a buildup of suspense, but not in the typical thriller way, I would say. Maybe more of an unease and just a discomfort surrounding a lot of the characters and knowing what's going to happen, because you know what's going to happen at the end of the book. But the whole point of the book isn't that you're on the edge of your seat just waiting for the tragedy to happen. It's studying the characters and understanding them. And what really worked for me was the dialogue. I think it was perfect, and it was just so well written. The dialogue was definitely a strong point in this book. There were some very interesting themes on class and wealth, and the cast of characters was very unique. And out of all the characters, there is only one that truly made me care for her. The rest are very unlikable, kind of in the Wuthering Heights sense of unlikable. In fact, Wuthering Heights is mentioned a few times in this book, which I found interesting. And I mentioned the 7 deadly sins are used, and it's kind of allegorical of them, and it's very, very true. They're used as a basis for a lot of the character conflicts and personalities and parent-child relationships and marital problems and things like that. Overall, I really, really enjoyed the book, and I thought it was very, very interesting, and would not expect a book like this to work for me, but it definitely did. Next up is a fantasy that I reread. I read it for the first time, I believe 2 years ago, and that is Heart of Red, Blood of Blue by Rebecca Belliston. And I'm very glad I reread this. I actually forgot quite a lot about it, so rereading it was very, very fun. I initially gave it 5 stars, and this time around, it's definitely a 4-star for me. I still very much enjoyed it, but it is first person present tense, which I just don't like. I just really don't like it, but I overall enjoyed it. And in this one we have Princess Gisela, and she is albino, so very interesting representation in this book. And she's betrothed to Prince Jarek of this other kingdom, only he is killed when she is going to their betrothal ceremony. This results in this huge war between the different kingdoms, and her father's determined to win, and there's just a lot of inter-kingdom conflict and issues and things like that. And Princess Gisela ends up on the run because her father wanted to marry her off to this very awful king of another country. So Princess Gisela ends up on the run and basically begins this quest to save her kingdom. And Gisela starts off very naive, but her character development is wonderful in this book. She's also very steadfast in her faith. This is Christian fantasy, and it wasn't overall preachy at all. It was just a very simple and sincere faith that Gisela had, and it really was shown beautifully in this book. But overall, really enjoyed my reread, and like I said, this was a 4-star. I would highly recommend. Next up, we have The Night Swim by Megan Golden. This is another 4-star, and this one I really, really enjoyed. I did go in expecting it to be much more of a thriller than it actually ended up being. This was more of a courtroom true crime podcast, very low on the thriller vibes, mystery, if that made any sense. So we have our main character, Rachel, who is the host of this podcast, and this new season that she is starting is all about this trial that is going on, and it is about the sexual assault of a girl by a boy from a very affluent family and how that's been going down in the courtroom and in the court system. She's trying to present the facts of the case in her podcast in as bias-free a manner as possible, and she's also trying to make sure that the victims' voices are heard. And then she starts getting these letters from a woman named Hannah, who is basically asking her for help. Hannah believes that her sister was murdered, and Rachel starts to notice some similarities between the case from many years ago and the current case that she is working on for her podcast. So it's definitely not like the fast-paced edge of your seat thriller, but I really enjoyed it. And as someone who really does love true crime, I really enjoyed the podcast elements, and I did listen to the audiobook while physically reading, so it elevated the experience hearing it in a podcast fashion. There was some music in the background, and it was just very well done as an audiobook. I also did not see the ending coming, which was really nice. I liked how everything came together, and the conversations around sexual assault were done in a very gracious and effective way, in my opinion. So really good book, and would definitely say the audiobook is the way to go for this one. Next up, we have The Souls of Lost Lake by Jamie Jo Wright. This one was a very, very creepy Jamie Jo Wright book. I really liked it, but definitely had to keep the lights on for it. And when I say creepy, there are some axe murder doll, creepy doll, ghost-like appearance vibes, and summer camps, creepy lakes, fog-filled forests, very, very unsettling. So this is dual timeline, and in the modern timeline, we have Ren, who works for the summer camp with her father and brother, and this young girl goes missing, and it kind of resurrects these campfire stories of Ava Coons, and it is a very, very creepy story of this girl who came out of the forest holding a bloody axe after supposedly murdering her family. Then we go back to Ava's time, and we learn about her, what went down during that time, and how she is dealing with how people perceive her because of her reputation. But more people are being murdered, and many think that Ava is the culprit. Some think she's not, so there's a bit of a mystery there. And Ren, who's in the modern timeline, is experiencing some things that may indicate that Ava Coons is still around. I did guess a huge reveal for both timelines, and I generally prefer to feel kind of blindsided and like, oh, I didn't see that coming. So I did guess, and I was right, and that's fine. I still loved the writing, the atmosphere, the setting. Would highly recommend. Next up, I have a book that I buddy read with a wonderful friend, Michaela, and we both had such a great time with this book, and that is The Circus Train by Amita Parikh. And this one I gave 4.25 stars, so just a bit higher than 4 stars. And in this book, we have our main character, Lena, and she is the daughter of the most talented illusionist in this circus, this traveling circus. And she also is wheelchair bound because she had polio, and she's unable to walk. She just feels like she's constantly being pushed away from her potential, and she just wants more out of her life, and she wants to push past her disability. And this book is also set as World War II is about to begin. And one day, this young boy named Alexander ends up being, I guess, rescued and brought onto this train and joins the circus, and he's very talented. There's definitely a mystery around his identity and his past, and he's trying to keep that secret for a variety of reasons. Alexander apprentices under Lena's father, and during the war, Lena ends up separated from the two of them, and the story kind of goes from there. A big chunk of this book takes place when Lena and Alexander are young preteens, I would say, and then the last chunk of the book is when they are adults. So I definitely preferred the plot when they were children. I just wasn't a fan of certain things that happened towards the end of the book, but overall, I very, very much enjoyed this book. I will say all the circus descriptions are so beautiful and dazzling and atmospheric, and it truly is an emotional roller coaster of a story as well. And I still find myself thinking about Lena and her father Theo, as well as Alexander. They were just incredible characters, and for a debut, this book is incredible. I would highly recommend this historical fiction. It is definitely one of my favorite World War II historical fictions as of now, and yeah, I had a great time. Would highly recommend. Another 4.25 read, we have The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter by Theodora Goss. I finally got to this book. I've been meaning to read this for years now. I've had this for a while, and I'm so glad that I read it, and I really need to read books 2 and 3 in this trilogy. This was so fun. This is a YA historical Victorian fantasy, I guess, and it's also kind of sci-fi and gothic, and it's just a lot, but it's basically a retelling of a variety of stories, mostly though of Jekyll and Hyde. Jekyll and Hyde as a story is really at the heart of this book. And instead of it being a retelling of Jekyll and Hyde directly though, we are now looking at the next generation, Jekyll and Hyde's daughters. We have Mary Jekyll and Diana Hyde. And then we also have some other very fun characters, Justine Frankenstein, Beatrice Rappaccini, and Catherine Moreau. So I haven't read The Island of Dr. Moreau, which is what Catherine Moreau is based off of. And then Beatrice Rappaccini, I believe Rappaccini's daughter is the story, and I think that's by Nathaniel Hawthorne. So I haven't read that either, but those are the other 2 stories that kind of trickle into this one. But like I said, Jekyll and Hyde is where the main, I guess, meat of the story originates from. And we also have Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson as characters in this book. And basically these girls all come together after a variety of circumstances occur that kind of, bring them together. And it starts off with the death of Mary Jekyll's mother, who was believed to have basically gone insane, and a murder occurs, and there's some evidence of this group of mad scientists. And at the very end of the summary on the back, it says, "It is time for the monsters to triumph over the monstrous." So these 5 girls that come together, there's kind of like this found family trope. They're all a product, I guess, of literary monsters, if you will. We have Frankenstein, Dr. Jekyll, Dr. Moreau, and it's just such a fun retelling and such a fun Gothic Victorian story. And this was also a debut, so I found it to be very impressive, and like I said, I cannot wait to read books 2 and 3. And I would definitely recommend this one. It is very fun. And I have 2 more books to talk about. Both of them were 5 stars. And first up, we have a book that was a reread for me. I've read this book many times, and each time it is just as powerful. And that is An Echo in the Darkness by Francine Rivers, book 2 in the Mark of the Lion trilogy. Do I even need to say why this is 5 stars and why I love it so much? I know a lot of you know what this series is about, and a lot of you have heard me talk about it before because I've read it many times and I've talked about it many times. But if you don't know what it's about, the series is set in ancient Rome during the early church. So just a few decades after Jesus has resurrected and ascended to heaven, and we have this slave girl named Hadassah who works in a Roman household, a wealthy Roman household, and she encounters Marcus, who is the son of the owners of this house. Many other characters end up impacted by Hadassah's faith, and I don't know how much to say because I'm scared I'm going to spoil it. So it's incredible. Book 1 ends up on a huge cliffhanger, and book 2, you need to read them back to back. I highly recommend doing so. But book 2 is just such a redemption-filled, powerful, emotional gut punch in the best way. And yeah, it's 5 stars. I don't know what else to say. It's incredible. And last but not least, I would say An Echo in the Darkness I still love just a little bit more, but I saved this one for last just because I finished this the most recently. And I did finish this September 2nd, but I am including it in my August wrap up because I read the majority of it in August. That is Dombey and Son by Charles Dickens. And finally, I have a Charles Dickens book besides A Christmas Carol that is 5 stars. This book honestly shocked me. I was not expecting to love it as much as I did. I went in very cautiously with not the highest of expectations, just because I typically struggle with his over wordiness and his inability to just get to the point in as few words as possible. But this one was truly incredible. And although the book is called Dombey and Son, the main character is actually Florence Dombey, who is the daughter of Mr. Dombey. So we have Mr. Dombey, who is this business owner, and his hope for the future is that his son Paul will work with him for this firm, and he calls it Dombey and Son because of that, and he's so proud of his little Paul. He's his favorite child, of course. He's a male, he's his heir, and Florence is nothing. She means nothing. It's really sad. She's kind of just the spare, even though she's older. So like I said, Florence is the main character, and she's truly at the heart of the story. She's neglected and she is cruelly treated by her father. It is such an emotional roller coaster of a book because of her story. And then of course there is an incredible cast of side characters, and they're all so unique and important and bring something so important to the story. And this is a story where I truly saw all the threads weave together in the most beautiful way, and all the subplots come together beautifully at the end. Every character matters, and everything that they do and say plays an important role in the story's progression and where we end up at the end of the story. I think my favorite character besides Florence is Edith. I'm not going to say anything about her or what she does in the story or like her role, just because I feel like it is a spoiler and you should know as little about the plot as possible going into this book, in my opinion. But Edith is one of those characters that is very ambiguous almost, and definitely morally gray, and a very interesting female character, especially considering she was written by a male Victorian author. I think Dickens did a really good job with her characterization. She was just so fascinating, very complex character. And we also have Susan Nipper, who is one of my other favorite characters. She is a spitfire. She's hilarious. She's Florence's maid, and I loved every scene with her on page. And Mr. Toots, the sweetest, sweetest, hopeless romantic of a man. And also the names in this book just kill me. Susan Nipper, Mr. Toots. We have Captain Cuddle. He's very like harsh on the outside, but he's a softie. He's truly a softie. Walter, such a sweet, sweet boy. Eventually a man. He's so sweet. And then the villain, evil, evil Mr. Carker and his huge teeth. And another favorite character is Mrs. Skewton, and she's just this old flirt, and she was really funny as well. She's actually Edith's mother, so great cast of characters, all very unique. So good. It's such a big book. Very, very chunky, but so, so worth your time in my opinion. And yeah, I'm so excited to continue reading Dickens books because I've heard they only get better, and I am reading them in publication order. I did make a mistake though, and I read David Copperfield before this one, even though it was published after. But I'll be completely honest, I'm glad that I did because that one was good. It was a 4-star read for me, but this one I loved so much more. And then next I have Bleak House, which I plan on reading in January, and then the rest of his more well-known books. So I'm so glad I read this, and I'm just so excited to read the rest of his bibliography. So amazing, so good, 5 big stars, would highly recommend. And that is my August wrap up, friends. Those are the books that I read throughout the month of August and trickling into September just a little bit. I honestly had a little bit of trouble talking about some of the books just because it feels like I read them so long ago. I don't know, I feel like August kind of dragged a little bit for me, but it was an overall good reading month, and I am happy with what I read. But that is it for this video. Thank you all so, so much for watching, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye.